remember seeing this movie when it first came out in theaters. The moment I walked out of that building, I hated this movie. And then it came out on DVD. I bought it, watched it again, and I still hated it. Yet, I have a copy and I still have it to this day. There's nothing wrong with this movie. Nothing major. I mean, bad acting, couple bad shots, really terrible directing. Your usual standard fare for a crappy horror film. Now, my problem with this movie is what it did to the Silent Hill franchise. Not so much what it did directly, but kind of a butterfly effect of what its success did to the franchise. But this is a crafting channel and not a video essay channel, so what am I doing here? In my last little intro video that I did, I have a collection of Silent Hill statues that I've painted a long time ago, like way over 10 years ago. And I've had 3 statues that I have not painted yet. I had them for a long time, I never finished them. I finally found some free time to actually tackle them, so I figured I need something to talk about while I do it, so this is what we're doing. My topic in this video will be the Silent Hill movie and the upcoming adaptation of Silent Hill 2, directed by Christophe Gans. So, 2006 was a long time ago, so I kind of need to set the stage to kind of get you in the mindset of what things were like back then. Around this time, terrible film adaptations of video games were a dime a dozen. There were no really good video game adaptations yet at that time. The closest might have been like Tomb Raider, but the most successful probably was the Mortal Kombat movie adaptation. Now, the reason these adaptations were so good was because the games themselves at the time didn't have that much story. So the director could pretty much write whatever they wanted as long as it had the face of that game. It was enough to sell it. And not counting directors like Uwe Boll, every other video game adaptation was pretty much doing this. They were taking any video game they could find that was at least popular and they could get the rights to, and they would churn out a crappy movie over a summer. But a reason that a lot of these adaptations were so terrible, though, was because at this time, the games that they were getting the rights to were also starting to go through a renaissance. Around the early to mid-90s, there was this big pushback against video games, mostly because of the release of Mortal Kombat. This was kind of following the wave of like the Satanic Panic in the 80s. This kind of went into the 90s with a lot of like pushes against rock music, rap music, violent video games. At the time, video games were looked at as like toys for kids. But around like early to mid 90s, I want to say like around the time that the PlayStation 1 actually came out, game developers decided they were going to try and show the world that their video games were more than just toys, that they could be an art, just like music, film, books, that they could tell something compelling or at least thought-provoking or interesting or artistic. Which is why to this day I still consider the PlayStation 1 and PlayStation 2 era to be kind of peak video games, because that's when they tried the hardest to tell the best stories. Graphics might not have been the best, but they tried hard. That's when we had a lot of breakthrough titles like Metal Gear Solid, Resident Evil. Final Fantasy was always good, but with Final Fantasy VII, like you really saw it kind of like bump up a notch. And of course, with Konami's Silent Hill. So a lot of these directors, who are still kind of old for the time, they took these games that had kind of like a neat premise and then just went with it. They didn't play the games, they just wrote off whatever they thought was kind of cool for a movie. And then when the directors would come out for the media circuit for the film's release, they would always tout that, oh, we're huge fans of the games. We're going to honor the video game. We really love the video games. And then you watch the movie and it has absolutely nothing to do with the video games. The idea for the base on the Memory of Alessa one is the carousel from Silent Hill 3. There's technically 2 versions of it in Silent Hill 3. There's the initial version when Heather has to go around and beat each of the horses until they're all dead. Then everything gets bloody and gets that cool effect on it, and then it switches over to the Otherworld version, they're both kind of like, I don't know, the ultra Otherworld version, the Memory of Alessa version. I'm doing the one beforehand where it's just like metal grating with some giant rivets. It's more reminiscent to Silent Hill 1. The only reason I'm not doing the one after it transforms when you fight Memory of Alessa is because that's like some big fancy carpet with a ton of fancy designs, and I have no intention of sitting here all day getting all that out. In short, I'm lazy. The Silent Hill movie was no exception to this. It was the same exact thing. Christophe Gans said that while writing the script, he would lock himself in his office and play the video games over and over while he wrote. And that he was a huge fan of the series and wanted to do his best to honor the entire franchise. Which I will give him credit. He did do a lot of small nods here and there throughout the film that reference parts in the games. Visually, he got a lot of stuff right. Probably the best in the entire film, in my opinion, are 2 shots specifically. When Rose is running down this one back alley, and there's like a shot from inside a garage, you can see that exact scene inside the video game. That's probably the best shot in the whole film, in my opinion. But this has always been my gripe when it comes to any kind of adaptation. If a director says that they truly love the source material, why are we not adapting from the source material? When it comes to movies, books, video games, they all tell their stories differently. So it is possible to translate that into a different medium in the right hands. And not to mention with the Silent Hill series, this film came out in 2006, so it started production in 2005, which means at that time, you had the original 4 games from the original team to run as source material. Not only did you have Silent Hill 1's game story, all of its notes, but you also had that same source of information from the next 3 games after that. So if there were any gaps that you needed to fill, story-wise, lore-wise, you had sources to get that information from. I've heard a lot of people defend this movie in the past, saying that if you were to do a 1-to-1 adaptation of Silent Hill 1, the video game, that the majority of the film would just be someone running around. This is the cheapest argument I've probably ever heard. Silent Hill 1 actually does have a full, complete story. If you count the side mission that is kind of required to get the good plus ending, because if you use all that, every single character in that story has a complete character arc from beginning to end, and they all intertwine in some way. You can't have Lisa without Dr. Kaufman. You can't have Dr. Kaufman without Dahlia. You can't have Dahlia without Alessa. They all tie together in some way. And then for any more additional lore, you can also access all of the notes that are scattered throughout the game. And then on top of that, you have an entire game of Silent Hill 3, which was made to fill in all the gaps of Silent Hill 1. Any unanswered questions were answered in that game. So to make an adaptation of Silent Hill 1, you have a mountain of stuff you can pull from. If Christophe Gans did sit down and play the games like he said he did while writing, he would have had all of that information at his fingertips. But what we got in the end was a story that resembled nothing of its original source material. Which is one of the main reasons that I don't like this movie. Not because it's unfaithful to Silent Hill 1. It's unfaithful to the lore of Silent Hill. Now, that alone wouldn't be that big of a deal, but Silent Hill has sequels. And if you mess up the lore from Silent Hill 1, it's going to be impossible to tell that story faithfully. So I think I mentioned this before, but the Memory of Alessa figure that I got here, it's not even really a like a secondhand thing. It's not an official, obviously, but it is a recast of an official, and it's not a professionally recast one either. The guy that did it, it was kind of like his first time really trying with it, so he did a couple tries. I bought it from him personally, not personally like in person, but through some DMs and some Facebook groups for people that used to do these things all the times. So there's a handful of imperfections from his casting process. For example, if I show real close right here, you can see there's some cracks here on the hood of her coat. Now, that's probably there on purpose in terms of the design, because everything's kind of like flaking and stuff, and I'm fine with that. But there's a section here of that's kind of like peeling a little bit. Like, I don't know if air got in there or something, but it's almost like it's layered. Actually, if anything, it looks almost like this part should flake off, because it looks almost like everything else kind of flaked off with it. Because the whole thing comes off, and below it is all of this. So I'm not 100% sure if I should or if I shouldn't just take it off the rest of the way. Because if I don't, I can give it that cool aesthetic feel that she has to her, where, like, you know, she's burnt and dirty and all that. And this can kind of help bring some of that detail out in the paint process. I'm not seeing a ton of other issues. I mean, I still need to clean up some of the seams and stuff. So I bought this years and years ago. So I started them and then I never finished them. So they've been sitting 4 years. So I did a terrible job actually touching up all these seams, which is, I'm trying to clean them up before I start doing anything else. I did notice that there's a huge gap. I can see right there in her leg right there. That's actually pretty minimal compared to some that I've gotten in the past. Especially the ones I've gotten from China. Those were usually the worst of all the ones I've ever gotten. I don't think none of them were ever Silent Hill related, not that I remember. There surprisingly isn't a whole lot of flash on this either, considering this is this guy's supposed first attempt. There's like a little bit here. I mean, the camera's probably not going to pick it up, but I can get it real close. Right there down the center of the arm. There's a little bit there. That'll be easy. It's exactly a knife and some sandpaper. That'll take care of that. But I'm not really seeing too many imperfections, other than this spot back here. On the hood. I think the guy did a pretty good job. Now, I think most of these like official ones will come in like more and more pieces. So like, I think in this one, it was like the skirt and the one leg were already pre-attached. The other leg was not. I had to attach that. And it was the torso, and the two arms were separate, and then the head was separate. But some of the other ones, for example, the other Heather that I did, and then, so I had two of them. I had two models of Heather, and I converted one to Memory of Alessa, and I made both of them. The way that kit, that's probably the most like famous Heather kit that's out there. The head on that one, I believe, was 3 or 4 pieces. So you had the head, and then I think 2 or 3 pieces for the hair. That's usually how a lot of these work. This one's all in one, which is going to make it very difficult to paint. And in hindsight, I feel very stupid for actually attaching the head this early. I don't know what I was thinking, because it's been so long since I've actually done these. The first batch I did was probably pre-2010. And then when I got these, it was about like 2015 or so. So there was already about 5-6 year gap between when I bought these from the last time I did them. And now I'm waiting another 6 years or so to do it again. Actually longer. Yeah. So I'm kind of learning as I go, and learning from my mistakes and noticing some of my mistakes, but we'll figure it out. So it's going to be very difficult for me to actually just go through and list every change that was done from movie to game. So I'll try to just cover some of the basics. And this means I'm not going to be covering anything after Silent Hill 4. Mostly because all of that came after the film, so you can't really count all that. So up until the point of Silent Hill 3 and Silent Hill 4, the power that's in Silent Hill is still somewhat mysterious. You do find out that it was a Native American holy place before the American settlers settled in and kind of like wiped out all the Native Americans, and that the whole place was kind of tainted from that point on. But whatever energy or power that was within that town, people in the town were able to pick up on it and notice it. And this was kind of the original birth of the cult in Silent Hill. We don't know to what extent they actually could control things, but it was enough that their religion was based around this, and that somehow it brought Alessa into being. At the time in Silent Hill 1, it's not really explained to what extent her power was either. Even in Silent Hill 3, they don't fully explain what all she could do, or where those powers actually came from. But with her mother being Dahlia, who's also the head of the cult, it's possible that there was some sort of like ritualistic stuff going on involving her birth, especially considering Dahlia's plan from the start was to use Alessa for the goal of birthing the cult's god. From what I remember in the game, I believe her original plan was to wait until Alessa was of age, or mostly as an adult, and was a devout follower of the cult's faith. But if I remember right, I believe Alessa was kind of like swaying away from all that stuff and becoming more and more defiant of Dahlia. And this was what prompted Dahlia to hasten the process. Now, my personal headcanon for what Alessa's powers was that I think she was more of a bridge between reality and the power that the town had, and that Dahlia wanted to use her to bridge that gap, to pull in that power, to exploit it for their own purposes, and in this case, make their faith a reality. But again, that's my headcanon, and I don't know if those are the facts or if there even are any facts on that subject. Now, from what I remember, I believe the reason that Dahlia burnt Alessa in the game was because she thought that if she could put Alessa in such physical pain that the god she's linked to would feel that suffering and come to her sooner. Unless I'm mixing that up with Silent Hill 3. Because that was also Claudia's plan. Which is why I never took the term birthing god to be literal, but instead be more figurative. Almost like she's a vessel for that entity to come into being. Almost like a possession, which you do see in one of the bad endings in Silent Hill 3. Which would make a lot more sense when you consider that Dahlia's original plan was to wait for Alessa to be much older, most likely replacing Dahlia's spot as the head of the cult. But again, that's not really stated explicitly in the game, so that's kind of my personal headcanon as well. But regardless, Dahlia's backup plan of birthing the god early didn't go all the way through, because Alessa used her powers to split herself into two. Her soul was half as powerful, and they couldn't complete the ritual, because whatever that power she had was no longer as strong. And then that leads into the events of the video game. For the past 7 years, the cult had kept Alessa in the basement of the hospital in secret, still torturing her and putting her through a ton of pain until her other half felt a strong desire to come back to aid her. And that's where the events of the first game start. Harry takes his daughter Cheryl to Silent Hill, crashes his car, and immediately loses her. And then he spends the rest of the game trying to find her. Now, I won't go into full detail about every aspect of every character and every side story, but there's a few key things that I think I should probably touch on. The story arc between Dr. Kaufman and Lisa Garland has a lot to do with the alchemical nature of the cult itself. Not only were they making potions and remedies that would work within the religion. For example, the Aglafotis, which is a red liquid that can ward off evil. And not only do you use it, both in Silent Hill 1 and in Silent Hill 3, but it also works both times. And then there's also PTV, which is the drug that they sell to tourists, where Dr. Kaufman is heavily involved in that drug trade. And as far as I'm aware, I believe both of these are sourced from local flora that are exclusive to Silent Hill. And then there was the story of Lisa, who was forced to take care of Alessa in the basement of the hospital against her will, mostly through blackmail by Dr. Kaufman, by keeping her addicted to PTV. And then the other major character relations to talk about is between Harry and Dahlia. Throughout the game, Harry has no idea what's going on, especially related to the cult and Alessa. To him, he's just looking for his daughter. And throughout the game, Dahlia's helping him out. She's giving him advice, she's telling him where to go, she's giving him items to help him along the way. It's not until the final act that you find out that everything Dahlia had told you was a lie. And there's this huge plot twist in the final act of the game where everything kind of gets twisted and starts making perfect sense. That Alessa isn't the one going around turning everything into what it is. That's the result of Dahlia's meddling. That Alessa wasn't trying to capture his daughter, but instead his daughter was trying to go to Alessa because she is Alessa. And Harry finds this all out after he had already caught Alessa for Dahlia, who at this point is now able to complete her goals of birthing the god because she now has a full Alessa once again. And Alessa gets transformed into this god, and Harry has to kill it, effectively also killing Alessa and Cheryl. I'm not 100% sure which is the canonical ending. It's either the good ending or the good plus ending. The only difference between the two is if Sybil survives. But Alessa's able to come back with a little bit of energy she has left, reincarnates herself as a new baby to give to Harry. Dahlia and Kaufman die. Lisa is already dead technically, and Harry takes the baby and leaves Silent Hill. The end. And from this point on, somehow the spiritual energy of Silent Hill has been transformed yet again, which seems to be a reoccurring theme in the history of Silent Hill. Something bad happens to it, and it gets more powerful, or at the very least tainted. This is seen in a lot of the history aspects throughout the first couple games. For example, when the American settlers come in and take out all the natives, that tainted the town. And then there was also another time as well, I can't remember the exact dates, it was mentioned in Silent Hill 2, where the entire town just more or less vanished and disappeared. But needless to say, it's happened over and over, and this time it got a lot more powerful. Now, in the context of the Silent Hill movie, literally nothing makes any sense in the end. I sat down and watched it for the first time in probably at least 10 years, just to be able to have it fresh in my memory. And I took a ton of notes just to see if I could make sense of what I didn't understand 10 years ago, the last time I watched it. And none of my questions were answered at the end. The farthest back the history of the town goes in this movie is that there is this religious group that founded the town, but they're also kind of insanely fanatical, and that Dahlia is a part of this group, but she's like a low-level person, and that just because she had a kid without naming the father or being married for some reason, they found it to be a great sin that needed to be cleansed. So they take Alessa to a hotel and burn her alive. Why, I don't know. But luckily the fire department and the police come and save her, but do nothing to the cult for doing it, sure. And then they take her back to the hospital where she is then cared for as pure, full public knowledge that she survived. And while in intensive care, she apparently, according to the ending of this, got very, very angry. And that's when, quote unquote, the devil shows up and makes a deal with her that she can get her revenge by putting all of the cultists into her nightmare or some crap like that. And Alessa agrees to this contract. No explanation as to why this devil chose her, or what makes her so special, or why her over every other person that's been burned by this cult gets to be chosen to do this to the entire town as a whole. Because for all the information we're giving, there's nothing special about Alessa in the film. Literally nothing. She has no powers. She's not related to the cult other than just being the kid of a lady who wasn't married. But she agrees, and they create the Otherworld. And then Alessa splits her soul into two for no reason given other than because it's the happy side of Alessa. I guess because the bedridden Alessa was too angry. That doesn't make any sense. Nor does it make any sense as to why her new half, which is now Sharon instead of Cheryl, needs to come back to Silent Hill at all. Alessa is doing a fine job at killing all these cultists inside of her new nightmare world. But for some odd reason, unexplained in the film, the cult in the movie, their faith works in this other world that Alessa created with the devil for the purpose of killing the cultists. So why the cultist stuff works in this world that is not theirs makes absolutely no sense. But because it works, they're able to have one safe haven, which is inside their church. Not explained why. But the devil needs in that church, so I guess that's why Sharon needs to go to Silent Hill, but they don't use her to go into the church. They use her mom, Rose, who is a fill-in for Harry. And they achieve that goal. Alessa gets to slaughter the remaining cultists in the church, and that's it. Devil's happy, Alessa's happy. There's no mention as to what happens to Alessa at the end. She's still in Silent Hill, who is also being taken care of by Elisa, who is not like the Lisa in the games. I guess Alessa and Lisa are just still hanging out in the other world in the basement of the hospital. There's no explanation as to what the resolve was for this whole thing. Just that now the devil is in Sharon when they leave. Again, why? There's no explanation as to what this devil thing is, why it helped Alessa, why it wanted to go into Sharon, what happens to Alessa at the end, or Lisa. No resolve. Just that we got a really cool Hellraiser scene at the end, and that's it. That's the Silent Hill movie. Which, on its own, that's fine. It's a serviceable 90-minute crappy horror movie. We get like 20 of them a year, so it just gets lost in the dust of it all. Now, when adapting a film from its original source material, there's always going to be changes. I mean, even when it comes to books, the two mediums are very different. The way they tell the story is very different. One's literal and then the other is visual. And you can always approach this in different ways. I mean, for example, when it comes to a movie like The Shining, I'm pretty sure Stanley Kubrick was very vocal about how much he didn't like the book, and he decided to improve upon it. We can all agree that The Shining is a pretty good movie, except Stephen King. He doesn't like it because it's not faithful to his book, but he did make a very good movie. On the other hand, you can go insanely faithful. So, for example, David Fincher's Fight Club. That is almost word for word the same as the book. The only major change, I believe, was the ending. But in this scenario, Christophe Gans touted that he was a big fan of the games, that he loved Silent Hill. So again, if you really loved the source material, why would you go about changing it so much? And the argument to this, back in the day at least, used to be, well, if you like the original so much, just go watch the original, go read the original, go play the original. But I don't think in today's context that really works. I mean, why are we remaking the Resident Evil games when you can just go play the original, you know what I mean? And when it comes to films, books, and changing it from one medium to another, yes, we would like to see that story being told faithfully in another medium. Lord of the Rings, you know, I never read the books, but as far as I'm aware, those were insanely faithful films. It never made sense to me for a director to say that they really like the source material and then make their own film. To me, it comes off as insanely arrogant. I do understand, though, that there are also issues with studio meddling where the executives want this or that thrown in for whatever reasons, but I still stand by my comment on that. If you are a fan of the source material, you should be wanting to translate it to another medium, a medium that you are very proficient at. I mean, I always find it kind of funny when people will say, well, Silent Hill 1 doesn't have that much of a story. But when you compare the two side by side, Silent Hill 1 actually has way more story than the movie does. So that argument makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. We went from a story about a town with an unnatural, supernatural power and a cult that was exploiting that power for their own gains, and a girl gifted with that power using that same power to try and protect everything else from this cult achieving their goals. To a story about a religious group inside of a regular town who still has a Salem witch trial mentality, burning a girl because her mom wasn't married, and she makes a deal with the devil to kill everybody. Dahlia in the game is the leader of the religious cult. She uses and abuses everybody around her, including the main character, Harry, who she lies to throughout the entirety of the game until the very end, after she had already achieved her goals. In the movie, she's just a mumbling homeless person. In the game, Alessa splits her soul in two to prevent the cult from fulfilling its mission of using her as a vessel for their god against her will. And in the movie, she splits herself in two because she's angry. In the game, Lisa Garland is an insanely sad character who was stuck for 7 years, forced against her will to watch over this undying supernatural kid who was burnt head to toe, forced to deal with this gruesome image every day that she could not handle, and she was forced to by this cult who not only they have her blackmailed, but they also had her addicted to drugs, everything they could to make sure that she stayed there and stayed quiet. And then in the end, you find out that she was already dead just like everybody else. She just didn't know it yet. She was trapped inside the hospital as a ghost. The whole story is just sad. She is a sad character. And then in the movie, she is stuck watching Alessa in the hospital because she looked at Alessa. What? In the game, Dr. Kaufman is the head of Alchemilla Hospital, where Alessa is held. He's the one who's using and abusing Lisa Garland, and also keeping things quiet about Alessa. He's also running, or at least partaking in, the local drug trade that funds the cult. And in the movie, he doesn't exist. As for Sybil Bennett, I never personally found her to be that important of a character either way on both the film and the game. Originally, I think she was supposed to be a second playable character in the game, but due to funding issues and time issues, it never got either completed or even started. So she's always been kind of like this empty character who just kind of shows up and helps out. So I don't care about her. But then we have Harry, who in the games is a widower with an adopted daughter. She wants to go to Silent Hill. He takes her there for vacation because his wife had died and they needed to get away. And in the movie, he's swapped out with the character Rose, who, according to Christophe Gans, said that when playing the game, he could not see a father caring about his child like that. Obviously, I'm paraphrasing because that's how it reads when you actually listen to him explain that. But this character is still married and completely hysterical. So it's almost like he pulls a double sexism, where he doesn't think that men can care about their children, but he also feels that women are hysterical and need to call their husband anyway for help because they can't take care of themselves now that they fell victim to their hysteria. The whole thing is just so weird. Not to mention the entire intro to the movie explaining why her daughter wants to go to Silent Hill now, instead of just being like, yeah, I would like to go to Silent Hill for vacation. Oh, okay, that's great, honey. To Silent Hill, Silent Hill. The cringiest line of dialogue I've ever heard in any film, ever. And Cheryl, who is one half of Alessa, kept away from the town so that Alessa's power is only half. That way that the cult can't complete their ritual. And when she does return to the town, she doesn't go directly to Alessa. What she does is she goes around town laying down seals of Metatron to try and stop the spread of the Otherworld, which is getting out of control. In the movie, we have Sharon, who goes absolutely crazy about Silent Hill until her mother goes nuts herself and takes her kid there. And then when she runs off, the next time we see her in the film, she's with Dahlia. So she went to go live with Dahlia, who's a homeless lady living in an abandoned apartment. I mean, that's literally where she stays in the movie. The moment she leaves that car, the next time we see that character is with Dahlia, like halfway through the movie. Any other time you see her in the film, Rose is chasing the demon character. But in the game, you literally are chasing Cheryl. It's just that she has higher priorities than Harry. Her priority is taking care of the issue at hand with Dahlia. And in this case, that's laying down seals of Metatron throughout the town to try and seal off that evil. Now, as far as how the Otherworld works in the games, everything was tied to Alessa. Because she is that bridge between that supernatural power of the town and the cult, whatever they had done to her is spilling out through her into the town. So all the monsters, all the Otherworld darkness that you see is a manifestation of her subconsciousness. All the monsters are pulled from something in her life. The pterodactyls are from her reading a book. I can't remember what book it is off the top of my head. I can't remember. The giant moth is because she had a moth collection in her room. The dogs were because she had a fear of dogs. Stuff like that. A lot of childhood fears and stuff like that. In the film, aside from the Grey Children, all the monsters are pulled from Silent Hill 2, which have absolutely nothing to do with Alessa and all to do with James Sunderland from Silent Hill 2. In the film, they don't seem to have any real purpose for being. They're just monsters. In the game, the town has this very rich history of it being like an ancient Native American stomping ground that was tainted by American settlers, and then further tainted by the Civil War, and then further tainted by the cult, and so on. And in the movie, it's just a town. So the argument that the video game doesn't have that much story to begin with kind of becomes a moot point once you realize that the film has not even half of the story or the lore, and that nothing in it makes literally any sense. Now, at the start of this, I said that this movie was kind of the start of a downward turn in the Silent Hill franchise, and that it wasn't directly this film's fault, mostly Konami's. So what happened was, when this movie came out, Team Silent was already dissolved, and there really wasn't anything else in the works at the time, aside from the PSP game, which was in a very different state than what we know it as now. At that point, it was an over-the-shoulder Resident Evil 4 style game. The monsters all looked like Terminator monsters covered in bubblegum. Yeah, nobody was really happy about that game coming out. The gameplay footage looked absolutely terrible. Fortunately, Konami handed it off to a different developer to finish the title. But unfortunately, they also gave them some new requirements as well. Make it look like the movie. So the young Alessa that you're chasing around looks just like the demon girl from the movie. When it comes to the world transforming over into the other world, all of a sudden it's evil Alessa from the movie. This is not how things actually went in the first game, and this becomes a trend throughout the entire franchise from this point forward, where they start taking elements from the films and canonizing them. Because kind of what happened was, this film had some mild success in the theaters, especially in terms of the horror crowd. So all of a sudden, there's this new influx of Silent Hill fans from the theaters, and Konami really wanted to bank on that. So obviously there's no more Team Silent anymore, and Konami was as greedy as they are now back then. So they rushed out a ton of Silent Hill games, gave them all tight deadlines, small budgets. They handed them off to pretty much anybody that they could get to do it. So the very first big title game that they had ended up becoming Homecoming. I do remember an interview once somewhere after the game had come out from one of the devs. It might have been an anonymous thing too, I can't remember. But they said that everyone in the studio was insanely excited about being able to make this game when they found out that they were going to be able to actually make it for Konami. And then after their very first meeting with the higher-ups at Konami, that joy was lost. Because at first they thought, we're making Silent Hill 5, and then when they came out, it's like, we're making Homecoming. And as far as from what I remember reading about how that meeting went, they had two criteria. Make the story similar to Silent Hill 2, because that was the most popular story so far at the time, and make it visually similar to the Silent Hill movie, and bring in as much of that as possible. Supposedly, to Konami, this was their idea of bringing in the best of both audiences into one thing, which was Homecoming, which was also a disaster, and considered to be probably one of the worst Silent Hill games ever made. This also became a trend in terms of borrowing assets from the film as well into the games. So for example, the Otherworld transition that you would see in the movie looked cool on screen. I thought it was done a lot better in Ghost Ship, which came out like 4 years beforehand. But then you ended up seeing this peel away effect in all the games. You saw it at the end of Silent Hill Origins when Alessa goes all movie Alessa on the town. You see it all throughout Silent Hill Homecoming and Silent Hill Downpour. Now, before this, though, all 4 games that came out, Silent Hill 1, 2, 3, and 4, they all had their own unique styles of Otherworld transformations. Silent Hill 1 was the most sporadic, which makes sense in context of the story. This Otherworld is literally like an explosion of psychic energy that's just uncontrolled, and it's going off in different ways all over the place. So at times you'll see Harry just teleport from one place to the other, which is kind of cool because most of the time when he sees Lisa, he's teleporting to her. It kind of gives you this Red Room vibe from Twin Peaks. But other times, it's shifting right before his eyes. Or he's going through impossible spaces, like in the school courtyard when he enters the clock tower and goes through a ladder, walks through a hallway, and then comes back exactly where he was, but in the other world. In Silent Hill 2, it's mostly very gradual, except for maybe once in the hospital, I think. After being locked in that one room from Laura, he falls down, camera goes into like a bed stretcher going down a hallway scene, and next thing you know, he's in the hospital, in the other world. But other than that, in Silent Hill 2, it's very gradual, to the point where you kind of don't really notice that you're in the other world until you're like so deep in it that there is no turning back, like when it comes to the labyrinth and the prison. And all of those are very symbolic of James diving deeper into his subconsciousness, into his psyche. The deeper he goes, the more he unravels, the deeper he has to literally travel into the earth. Like when he enters the Historical Society, and there's a staircase that goes down for like a mile. And then when he's down in there, opens up the door, and all of a sudden, he's down a well. And then after that, it's down another hole, and down another hole. And before you know it, he's gotta be miles underground. But when he's done, he's all of a sudden right back up to the surface, because he's not so much falling into real space, he's falling into like himself. With Silent Hill 3, the transformations are tied more to Heather, I think. Anytime she seems to encounter any kind of memory of Alessa, be it through meeting Claudia or something of that sort, she gets these same kind of headaches that Harry Mason would get when he was getting teleported and the world would shift around her. In some instances, it would just fade into it. In other instances, it was going into an elevator and all of a sudden you're in hell, So I guess in hindsight, 1, 2, and 3, they do have a lot of similarities in terms of how that other world shifts. But it does bring up a point I did want to make here. The Silent Hill movie, not only did it pull from the games for like small nods here and there, but it also pulled from fan theories. Now, I do know that the whole addition of all the Sean Bean scenes were mostly from studio meddling. They said there weren't enough male characters in the film, supposedly, and that they needed one, so he got Sean Bean and wrote his entire story. I have heard that there's an edit out there of the film without him, and it's 100 times better. I can believe it. But the way they explained away his scenes was by using the multiple dimensions theory. And at the time, that's all that was. I believe it still is, because if I remember right, in terms of Homecoming and Downpour, they don't really tell you one way or the other if there are multiple dimensions or if everything's just happening right then and there. They leave it kind of vague intentionally, which is good. But that said, Silent Hill Origins does dive into it because that's how they explain away the mechanics of shifting the reality from the real world to the other world via mirrors. But I'm rambling. The way this theory worked was that there was multiple layers to Silent Hill. You had the regular layer, which was the real world, where people still existed, everything was happening fine. Then you had the fog world on top of that, and then the other world. My problem with this is, aside from the fact that there's really no evidence whatsoever in the games to this. But if it was, you would think that at the very least the cult would acknowledge it, be it Claudia or Vincent. In fact, I think the games kind of work the other way around and provide more proof that it's happening in real space. For example, let's look at Silent Hill 2 real quick. Supposedly, Laura doesn't see anything in terms of monsters or whatever. Well, Maria is technically a monster, and she goes out of her way to avoid Laura at all costs throughout the entire game. Not just Laura, but she also tries to avoid Eddie and Angela as well. By that I mean, think of Pete's Bowl-O-Rama, when she decides she's going to stay outside, and then Laura leaves, and once James leaves, all of a sudden here comes Maria around the corner. Oh, I saw her, but I couldn't catch her, you know? And then it's not until James gets to know both Eddie and Angela more that their worlds start to collide. So when we go to fight Eddie towards the end, we are inside of his hell. When we meet Angela at the end, when she says, "For me, it's always like this," we're finally in her hell. Same when we fight the Abstract Daddy. We're in her hell. That's her hell. They all have their own, but they're not experiencing it differently simultaneously. If one is overpowering the other, everyone around them is experiencing it, including James. He's experiencing Angela's version. He's experiencing Eddie's version. If he was having a strong moment and they were near him, they would be experiencing his version. As far as Laura, everything is avoiding her intentionally around her. There's also some claims that, like, at the beginning of Silent Hill 3, the mall was empty when everything started to change. But technically not really. So obviously it starts out when she's asleep, having a dream. She wakes up, everything's starting to close. You still hear the hustle and bustle of people in the distance. And when she sees her first monster, it's attacking a person. And obviously someone was still in the bathroom when she tried to escape Douglas. And when she meets up with Douglas afterwards, when the world shifts back, he wasn't anywhere near her, but he also experienced these same monsters. So this entire intro for Silent Hill 3 shows that the Otherworld transitioned for everybody. I believe there was also one of the lines from Vincent in Silent Hill 3 as well. I think it was in the library in the church, where he mentions to her that monsters, they look like monsters to you? And she gasps, and he's like, it was just a joke. People took that literally, as if, like, those weren't monsters you were killing, those were people. If you refer later on in the game to a conversation he has with Claudia, it might have been before or after, I can't remember exactly when, but he mentions that this macabre aesthetic is the church's thing, and that he doesn't like it, but I don't know. My point is, though, is that the church sees the macabre aesthetic and likes it. To them, I think it's probably, especially to Claudia, who worships Alyssa, they see that macabre aesthetic as holy. It's a perspective thing, not a physical thing, like they're seeing something entirely different. It's just how they like something. You know, you might look at a Francis Bacon painting and think it's beautiful. Someone else might look at it and think it's the scariest thing they've ever seen. It's all perspective, and that's what he meant. To them, these things are beautiful. They are creatures of Alessa. They are holy. And to her, they're monsters. When the film included this multiple dimension thing, explaining that, I can't even remember what Sean Bean's character's name is now. when Sean Bean is in the real world and he's looking for Rose and she's in the other world or the fog world, that kind of legitimatized people's perspective on this theory as if it was true. And this same exact thing happened with multiple things throughout the movie. So, for example, Pyramid Head. You never really heard anybody try to explain away, say, the lying figure or the nurses, but Pyramid Head, because he was exclusive to James, they all were actually, somehow, because everyone liked him so much, there was this new excuse that he's there just to punish. Although, who's he punishing in the movie? Just the cultists? I don't know. And because they added him into Silent Hill Homecoming at the demands of Konami, that just made the whole thing even worse. Thankfully, over the years, the Silent Hill community finally kind of came around and realized, okay, that is Pyramid Head from Silent Hill 2. This is Silent Hill the movie, the boogeyman, who's there just for whatever reasons because Silent Hill Homecoming is trash. And then the only other negative impact I can really think of on the community, especially when it comes to your more casual Silent Hill fans, especially the movie fans, and that's over the whole subject of Centralia, Pennsylvania. This one bothers me the most because I live 2 hours away from it, so literally any time the subject of Silent Hill ever comes up, immediately I'm asked by everybody, oh, have you been to Centralia? It's the town that Silent Hill's based on. And I'm left with a blank stare because it's not. I don't know why Christophe Gans had to use it as a reference in the movie, because the original Silent Hill, all of them really, their sources of reference and inspiration have all been well documented. The whole underground coal fire thing, it's not in the games. I don't even think there's a coal mine in the games, to be honest. And that also leads to the whole subject of the falling ash that you see in the movie. In the game, it's snow. What bothers me the most about all this stuff, though, is that even though the Silent Hill community has been slowly coming around, realizing that, okay, this stuff is exclusive to the movie, not the games, they don't blend together, a lot of this information still gets put out there, either on YouTube, sometimes even the wiki, and all over social media, when it has absolutely nothing to do with the games. So hopefully none of that was too much of a jumbled mess and hard to understand. My main point, though, is that the film has literally nothing to do with the games. Now, back in October of 2022, Konami had their Silent Hill transmission. All of a sudden, they're interested in making video games again, and only Silent Hill games. That makes total sense. Drives a lot of confidence. So far, none of that seems to be working out too well in their favor. Silent Hill Ascension seems to be a complete dumpster fire. And everyone's excited about everything else, too, for some reason, as if the first domino fell if it's not just going to just keep on going. See, Silent Hill F looked really, really cool until I looked up the studio and realized that they have like zero track record of anything half decent. Mostly they have done like multiplayer stuff for other games, and that's it. Like a Resident Evil multiplayer mode, they did that. They worked on some portion of the Marvel's Avengers game, which got canceled very shortly after it was released. And now they're working on Silent Hill F. Yeah, inspires a ton of confidence, not in me. There's also Silent Hill Townfall, which, if I remember right, watching the thing for that, I don't see why people were interested in it. I'm not familiar with the developer. I didn't look them up because I don't care, because what I saw was enough to make me not care. we had a video clip of a radio, and stuff was being said, and then they cut to the developers talking about how much they are excited to make this game, and the only thing they show is them modeling this radio. All that's telling me is this entire game is going to be nothing but a radio. What were they even showing? And then there's the Silent Hill remake by Bloober Team, which, fine. I never really played any of their games, and I don't really care. I have 2 copies of Silent Hill 2. So, if I want to play, I can play on either PS2 or my Xbox. I have both for a reason, to play at these. No, what caught my attention the most was the news that Christophe Gans was also making a new Silent Hill movie. Silent Hill Return to Silent Hill. So I did a bunch of digging on that because we haven't heard jack squat since. And oh boy, where do we begin? First off, let's look at Christophe Gans' record. I don't mean to put the guy down or anything. I don't know what he does for a living. I don't think it's directing, because it says on his wiki page that he's been directing for like 42 years, and he has 4 movies. I don't know about you, but this is a cosplay channel. I do cosplay, I do arts and crafts. I feel like I wasted my life if I don't spend one of my free days doing something creative. If I'm not working on a costume, an art project, a YouTube video, anything. If I'm not working on something, I feel like I just wasted part of my life. I don't want to say I'm a workaholic, but I like to make things, and I like to be productive. This guy is a director, a producer, whatever. But he's only ever made 4 movies. One of them is Silent Hill. He averages about 1 movie every 8 years. That's what I looked at on his track record. His last movie was Beauty and the Beast. Not the Disney one, but one that none of us have probably ever seen. I've never even heard of it. This doesn't inspire a ton of confidence, especially considering he hasn't even worked on a film in like at least 8 or 9 years. I think his last movie was in 2014. If I didn't make a costume in that time period, I would feel like I lost a lot of my ability to do things. Actually, that is entirely true, because I recently started dabbling in animation again, and I'm nowhere near where I was back then. I also don't have the free time that I had back then either. So I feel like in that time period between when I stopped in my 20s, my early 20s, till now in my mid to late 30s, that I lost a huge skill set. If you haven't directed a movie in 8 years, I can see losing a skill set. He's not going to become a better director for it. He'll become less of a director. Especially considering when it comes to the whole Hollywood thing, that's a very collaborative process. You need to make connections, you need to know people. And if you spend enough time away from that, you start losing all of those connections. Which is why when I went to look up everybody else involved in this movie, I don't mean to put any of these people down, because obviously they're all going to put in their all. Everyone that works in these things, I mean, if you're working in the film industry, you're living the dream, you know, no matter how big or small. I would love to do it too, hence the costumes. But the director of photography, I believe he only ever made the Record movies, which I've never seen, but they're all POV movies. They could be good. I have no qualms with the dude, but if that's all he's known for, whether he's good with it or not, I don't know how that's going to translate to doing static cinematography. The movie's being co-written by 2 other people, along with Christophe Gans, so it's 3 writers, None of them have any IMDb pages or anything like that, so they're also ghosts. The actors are kind of, I don't want to say no names because they have credits, and they've also had leading roles. But they're not big names either, like Silent Hill 1. Everybody in Silent Hill 1, the main cast at least, were all big names. Roddy Mitchell was like hot off of Man on Fire, Pitch Black, movies like that. She's really good. Sean Bean, I think he was fresh off of Lord of the Rings and something else, but yeah, they're all big names. And this one, we don't have any. Not to mention that I looked it up later too, and apparently they finished shooting back in June of last year. That's 7 months ago. That means that the film has been in post-production for 7 months. We should have seen something by now. I mean, like a teaser, a screenshot, anything, nothing. We haven't even seen like on the set photos. This gives me the idea that this is going to be like a straight to video kind of thing, although that doesn't exist anymore. Now it's straight to Netflix, and I think that's what we're going to get. I don't see a theatrical film release. If we do, I'll be surprised. Now, Christophe Gans did say that he has learned from his mistakes and from all the studio meddling, and he wants to honor the games more now, and yada yada yada. I don't believe any of it. The film industry hasn't really changed when it comes to the landscape of video game adaptions. I'm trying to think off the top of my head the last really good one. I haven't seen The Last of Us TV series, but I hear it's really good, so I'm gonna say that. But also you have the Halo series, and it's supposedly insanely terrible. I never watched either of them because I don't really watch streaming all that much anymore. And considering this movie is going to be a sequel to his first movie, and considering everything that I just said for the past however long that was, way too long, I don't see this being even remotely close to its source material. In fact, during the Silent Hill transmission, they showed several screenshots, or they showed some of the storyboards from the film, and none of that was giving me any confidence either. They said that they were heavily inspired by some Greek mythology thing. Why? Like, why do you need to draw inspiration from literally something else? If you're that interested in that other thing, make the other thing. And then they also said that they wanted to modernize the story for modern audiences. I hate when they say this kind of stuff. I don't care how petty this sounds, but what is wrong with doing a period piece? You know, I understand. They made the Silent Hill 1 adaptation. It moved it from like the 70s and 80s when the game took place to early 2000s, early mid 2000s. So now if they want it to be a sequel to that, all of a sudden James has to be from that time period on or farther, which means now we need to explain away everyone's cell phones and all that other modern technology, because in my personal opinion, when it's come to modern horror, I hate most of it really because of the whole fact that now we need to excuse away technology. We're way more connected now as a society, so you have to explain away, why can't I just call somebody? You know, why can't I just use my GPS to get out? I need to come up with a reason for why my phone died every time. Why did my phone die? I saw this once before in another movie. Well, the movie never got made, thankfully. So one of my favorite books is Neuromancer by William Gibson. I'll keep this insanely short. But there's this iconic scene in the book where the main character, Case, he's a hacker, and he's given this job of a lifetime that's going to fix all of his problems. And once he starts learning a little too much about what's actually going on, and he's like, nope, screw this, I'm out. I don't want to do it. I don't want anything to do with this. So he walks away. Now, keep in mind, this book was written in the 80s. So we're dealing with 80s cyberpunk. So he's walking through a subway tunnel, or not so much a subway tunnel. He's walking through the subway, and there's this row of payphones. And as he's walking by them, they all start ringing in succession. 1, 2, 3, as he passes. And eventually he picks the last phone up, and it's his employer, who, spoiler alert, is an artificial intelligence, who's hired him to be pretty much the person who's going to unshackle his AI chains, you know? And the scene is insanely suspenseful, and it's probably one of the most iconic scenes in the whole book. And when they were planning on making this film adaptation, they were showing off storyboards, talking about how much they loved the book, but they had to modernize it for modern audiences. So they were like, well, we need to explain away payphones because no one uses payphones anymore. So we're going to swap that out for cell phones. And they explained away the scene as if he's going to be walking down a street and everybody's cell phones are going to start going off in different ringtones, and it's all going to talk to him through the ringtones. Who thinks that's a good idea? I mean, that movie was pitched long before Cyberpunk 2077 came out, or Blade Runner 2049. That revival of retro cyberpunk didn't happen yet, so thankfully Neuromancer never got made, at least by that director. What was I talking about again? That's right, they wanted to give James a cell phone. It was in the storyboards. Instead of having his flashlight, he was going to carry around his cell phone. He'd use his cell phone as a flashlight, which means he was also going to be using it for other shit. So imagine where this is going to go. Is he going to receive a letter, or is he going to get a text message or a voicemail? Or how far are we going to modernize this? You know, it's like, I got a DM from my boo. Yeah. Anyway, I guess now we can start talking about Silent Hill 2. I'm really liking the way this base is turning out on this one. Like I mentioned earlier, I am being pretty lazy with the bases because the bases aren't the focal point of the whole thing. It's the statue. One of my other ones, I intentionally made everything on the base darker, that way that the figure would like pop out more. I didn't want to draw too much attention to the base. I wanted, you know, the model to be the focal point. But that said, so originally I did the metal grating, or the metal plates or whatever, on the floor of the carousel. I had done that before on the last Memory of Alessa statue that I did. I show it in my intro video. So instead of doing like the carpet rug thing that's on like the Otherworld version, what I went for was that I don't know if you'd want to call it a blood effect, or like, but when everything starts to get that goopy crap all over it. My first impression was to turn it into blood. So my idea was to kind of like start out with like a certain color and then fade out to something a little bit lighter, to kind of like bring out the brightness in the center. But then the more I started doing it, the more I was looking at the reference photo, and it's bright on the outside and very dark on the inside. I don't know how to describe that effect, but it does look insanely cool. So I have this entire basket of like little sponge brushes. What I did, which you probably already saw in the video, I cut the ends up to make them more irregular instead of the perfect circle stamp they would be. That way they have like a distinct pattern. And then I just started mixing up colors to what I could get with the paints that I have. And it would just kind of like hit it, twist it, just to make sure that it was not going to be the same splotch everywhere around. And then started layering that with the from lighter to darker. And the effect actually looks pretty cool, at least from the top down right now. I'm going to wait till it dries, probably give it like one more black wash just to kind of like fill in some of the cracks, and hope that'll kind of work out for this. I didn't get the oranges as much as I wanted out of the reference images from these plates. I tried getting an orange, kind of, but I do have like 3 baskets of paint, but half of them are all dried out. So the one I did get, it tried making everything more of a flesh color, which didn't give me the orange that I wanted. If I tried to mix with anything else, it just went anywhere but orange. I guess I could have tried mixing up to some reds and yellows. I don't even know if I have any yellows. I might have one yellow. But yeah, working with what I got. So to kind of explain what happens to Silent Hill post Silent Hill 1 in the games, the best way I can describe it, at least in my own headcanon, I guess, is that the aftermath of Silent Hill 1, after Alessa dies and the god dies, that, for a lack of a better term, psychic energy now like permeates the entire town and just lingers. Like whatever bridge Alessa had to that supernatural power, that floodgate was open and it was kind of flowing just freely. And now instead of just focusing on Alessa, it's focusing kind of on everybody. And in Silent Hill 2, you can start seeing it draw in people to the town for various reasons. And then that psychic energy reacting on them individually. Explaining the story of Silent Hill 2 is a little complicated because there's no canonical good ending or bad ending. Every ending in the game is different. And on top of that, it's all based on how you play the game. And then to add on top of that, all your actions throughout the game that determine your endings redefine James's motivations throughout the entire game, from beginning to end. But the very basic premise is that James Sunderland receives a letter from his dead wife saying that she's inside the town of Silent Hill and that she's waiting for him. He's kind of lost in the world and doesn't have a whole lot to hang on to, so he has absolutely no reason not to go to Silent Hill to try and find her. And as the story progresses, he learns that he's not the only person being called to this town. He encounters Angela, who's looking for her mother, and Eddie, who is supposedly just on the run. He also ends up finding a little girl named Laura, who also was called here from Mary, but she wants absolutely nothing to do with James and avoids him at all costs. James spends most of his time in the game going to different locations where he thinks that Mary might be. His first stop is at Rosewater Park, where he ends up finding basically a doppelganger of his wife. Maria was created by the town. She's essentially another monster. But in this case, unlike the other ones, she's fully sentient. She has a personality, she has feelings. She even starts gaining memories of Mary. She builds a strong affinity for Laura, just like Mary did, even though she never really meets Laura face to face. Maria's kind of like another sad character, very similar to Lisa in Silent Hill 1, except in this case, Maria wasn't a person, as far as we know. Some theorize that she used to be a stripper at Heaven's Night and was somehow converted, but I don't fully buy that because there's not a ton of evidence for it. Just like all the other monsters in the game, Maria was manifested from his subconscious. She is more or less everything that he wished Mary was. Mary was very quiet and timid. Maria was very forward and aggressive. Mary dressed very conservatively. Maria dressed very flashy. As the game progresses, James's story about Mary continues to keep coming into question. Long story short, the big plot twist is that James actually killed his own wife. She did not, in fact, die 3 years ago. She was diagnosed to be terminally ill 3 years ago, and that she had only died recently. These facts come to light the more he starts to talk to Laura, who was also called to Silent Hill by Mary. At first, it seems like Laura was called to Silent Hill through real means. The first letter she talks about is one that she stole from her nurse at the hospital. A letter that Mary had written Laura on her deathbed before she died. That was only meant for her to read after she had passed away. However, towards the end of the game in a Lakeview hotel, she mentions that there's a second letter that she has to try and find. Which makes me wonder if this was another real letter or if this one came from the town as well. At this time, James's letter was already dissolving and disappearing in reality. So it's very possible that her letter too was also disappearing, which is why she got very worried when she tried to find it and it was gone. And because of that scene alone, I do believe that the town actually called Laura as well, despite the fact that she doesn't see any monsters. But there's clearly something up with her though, because she doesn't seem alarmed by the fact that there's no people or that everything is abandoned. This is one of the reasons people tend to theorize on the multiple dimension theory, thinking that she's in the real world. But I think it's because she has that same exact blind conviction to find Mary, just like James. Instead, I think there is something wrong with Laura. Not necessarily that she's another entity like Maria, but instead she has something else that she's dealing with too, just like all of our other characters. Because she does mention to Eddie that she runs away as well. Throughout the game, the town is constantly trying to remind James of what he did. From the design of the monsters and the locations he travels, straight up to Maria getting murdered in front of him over and over and over. And it's entirely up to the player with how they play the game that determines why he did it. The game doesn't try to justify what James did, but it does try to humanize him. You see a similar approach in movies like Falling Down or Taxi Driver. These aren't good people, but they are people. These kinds of films aren't trying to justify these characters' actions either, but instead focus on how people can fall apart, how they can go down bad paths and do bad things. Every person who's ever gone to prison, at one point, they had dreams, they had goals. Nobody's born a criminal, they're molded that way by society. And the crimes they commit are usually them lashing out in retaliation to the society that made them the way that they are. Be that justifiable or not, to them, it's one of their few choices that they have left. I mean, no homeless person wants to be homeless, but bad things happen. If your employer's main focus is maximizing profits by keeping wages low, you are most likely going to be living paycheck to paycheck. And when that employer needs to cut employees to cut more costs, you're now behind on your bills, and you run the risk of losing all of it. Now, you can say that we all have the ability to choose our own paths in our lives, which I find to be a little dismissive when it comes to other people's plights. That, or we can debate the concept of free will versus determinism and how much choice we really have in our lives, but I'd be here all day and I don't want to derail this topic any more than I already am. On the subject of Eddie, we're dealing with, at the time in 2001 when the game came out, kind of a new phenomenon on the subject of school shootings. It was only a few years prior when we had the Columbine massacre, and everything was a scapegoat. From video games to music to movies, everything but society itself. Today, however, we're a lot more conscious about stuff like bullying and the effects it has, be it depression and self-harm. Bullying, of course, is no new concept. Stephen King once said that the story of Carrie was inspired by a girl that he knew back in school who committed suicide because of bullying. On the subject of Eddie, he's very well aware of what caused him to be in the state that he's in. Eddie has no self-esteem. He constantly belittles himself throughout the game. Eddie clearly has a lifetime of depression as a result of the bullying that he received. And eventually he lashed out at one of the people who caused him this harm. In this case, it was a football player, most likely at his school. Or at least I assume he's in school. I never actually looked to see what his age really is. Good thing I still have the game in front of me. I can actually check the manual and see if it does say. Interesting. The manual mentions age unknown for everybody. Looks like the Silent Hill wiki says he's 23. That age is believable. I don't know where their sources is getting this information from. There is one picture they have of a character bio. It looks like it's from in the game, but I've never seen character bios in the game before. So I don't know if this is from like the fan-made HD upgrade for PC, or if this is from the HD collection. I'm not 100% sure. But regardless, it doesn't really matter. That kind of stuff can linger for years, if not a lifetime, afterwards. In the case of Angela, she had a family that she was supposed to trust and rely on, but not everyone is guaranteed a full or properly functioning family. She's used and abused by her father, and becomes a verbal punching bag by her mother. Broken homes alone can result in broken people, and the abuse that she was subjected to by her father, unfortunately, is a thing that happens. And for the subject of Mary and James, their plight is twofold. First things first, just life in general. We're all kind of sold on this illusion that we're all going to make it until the very end, but none of us are guaranteed a full life. I myself am becoming very well aware of this fact the older and older that I get. It seems like every year, at least one person that I grew up with ends up dying. I think I had this conversation with my sister a little while ago. We're not even in our 40s yet, and at least half of the kids that we grew up with in our neighborhood are now gone. If not due to accidents, then due to drugs. If not due to drugs, suicide. I think just in coworkers alone, in the past couple years, I think I've lost at least 5 coworkers to unnatural causes, mostly disease, be it cancer or some kind of failure. And in the case of James and Mary, they were still relatively young, thinking that they did have their entire life ahead of them. They were sold on the same story that we've all been sold on, that if you work hard, you can build a life for yourself and live well into your retirement age and enjoy your golden years. And before their life even started, that was taken away. Now, I understand that some might say this isn't as bad as what Angela and Eddie went through, and I don't mean to imply that. I think instead, the point I'm trying to make is that while Eddie and Angela never got a chance to enjoy the life that they had, James and Mary lost the ability to enjoy the life that they had going forward. And in Mary's case, to live at all. I can't find any official sources for how old James and Mary were. It does say on the Silent Hill wiki that she was 25 when she died, but before I go on a rant, the Silent Hill wiki is never to be trusted because most of the information is pulled out of thin air. It's either full of people's headcanon, or they pull information from unofficial or non-canonical sources. And Konami has always put their stamp of approval on literally anything. So there's a lot of unofficial, official sources of information that's all full of contradictions, if not retcons, just to tell their own new story. So if it's not explicitly stated in the game itself where it's made, take whatever the wiki says with a huge grain of salt. In the screenshots, there are biographies that do mention their age, but these biographies don't look like they're pulled out of the game. Not even the PC release or anything like that. If anything, it looks almost like something a fan made. So it's very possible this might have been from one of the enhanced editions or something like that. I'm not 100% sure. But either way, it's a fine estimate to go with, because this would mean that 3 years prior was when she was diagnosed, meaning that she would have been in her very early 20s when she was diagnosed with this terminal illness. And at that age, both her and James, even the concept of death is probably barely in their minds. This would completely alter their entire reality. But this also kind of leads to the second issue that they ended up dealing with, and that was the American medical system. Towards the end of the game in the Lakeside Motel, you start to see all the flashbacks, conversations that James had with the doctors, his visits with Mary in the hospital. She complained that the hospital must be making a pretty penny keeping her alive, and that she'd rather they just kill her. This reflects a lot of our mentality when it comes to the enormous cost that even a basic doctor visit can be. And considering James and Mary are so young, they obviously don't have a good foothold in the workplace. If I remember right, James was just a clerk, so he obviously does not have enough money to pay for these bills that they are going to be getting to take care of Mary. And to this day, the United States still doesn't have universal health care like most developed nations. And considering this game takes place around the 80s, there wouldn't be any legislation passed to help people get access to affordable health care for another 30 years. So considering their young age and their entry-level positions at work, it's very clear that not only do they not have insurance, but they also are completely incapable of covering the cost of these medical bills. And considering the fact that they can't save her anyway, this is an immense bill that he's going to end up having to pay for the rest of his life, on top of losing his wife. Another interesting thing too that I just thought of as well is, so I believe this game is supposed to take place sometime in the mid-80s, I believe. And I'm not 100% sure when hospice became a major national thing, but I would assume that it wasn't at this point, because in the game, they just send Mary home to be with James for him to take care of her until she died. And with something like hospice, you would have a nurse come to take care of you several times a week. But according to the game, before she got sent home, James was coming to visit her less and less frequently, partially because the closer she got to death, the more verbally abusive she became, the more angry she was in her situation. And that made him kind of more scared to visit her, I guess you could say. Plus, he didn't want to see her in that situation either. So by the time she does end up going home with him, there's already this new distance between them, in a sense. And with this new sudden responsibility on top of the medical bills, her deteriorating situation, her verbal abuse, he wasn't a strong enough person to handle all that. Like I mentioned earlier, with the way that the town of Silent Hill works now, post Silent Hill 1, it reacts to these people individually. We don't get to see a whole lot of Eddie's version of the Otherworld, but from what we do get to see, all of his monsters are people. We don't know if he perceives them all as his bullies or just people who are making fun of him. In this sense, when we do finally see this version of the Otherworld, one comment from James was enough for Eddie to see James as one as well. Everything has a very cold and icy feel to it. There's meat lockers everywhere, hanging meat from what looks almost like obese creatures. most likely a reference to his own weight problem. For Angela, her otherworld seems to be mostly focused on her home life. The only monster of hers we get to see is the abstract daddy, but later on we do get to see similar characters hung to walls that could represent either her or her family on a bed covered in blood. Her world is constantly on fire. In the scene where you finally get to see that, she mentions that to her it's always like that. This is an interesting concept throughout the game with these three characters. Eddie's world is very cold and icy, hence the meat lockers. There's a lot of cold steam everywhere. Meanwhile, Angela's other world is on fire. And James's other world is wet. Everything is soaking wet. Each of which can symbolize their moods, their inner feelings, who they are as a person. Eddie is cold and detached. Angela is angry and out for revenge. And James is full of sorrow. These elements all kind of represent those feelings. And as far as James's monsters go, we get to see them the most, obviously. I believe the flesh lips are only ever seen in the hospital, and they obviously represent Mary in her final stages when she was at the hospital herself, for example. But the biggest misconception when it comes to Silent Hill 2, especially thanks to the movie that Christophe Gans made, is around the subject of his biggest antagonist in that game, which is Pyramid Head. Pyramid Head is a creature that takes on the appearance of an executioner from the past in Silent Hill. This is one of the main reasons that people assume that Pyramid Head is a constant creature throughout the Silent Hill universe. But I've always disagreed with this idea, mainly for a few reasons. One, they reference the painting in the Historical Society as being the key point of this is what he looks like, this is where he's always been. But aside from the fact that in the movie and in Homecoming, he does not look like that painting, we also have photos of what the executioners actually looked like inside the prison in the labyrinth. And what they look like is almost like just a person in a white robe with a red hood, almost like a standard executioner outfit. As for the subject of the painting itself, I always look at it as either one of two things. One, the painting doesn't exist, and it's just another figment of James's imagination. Or two, the most likely scenario is that when James and Mary went to Silent Hill, they visited the Historical Society, and that painting is an artist's interpretation of that time period in Silent Hill's past. And that painting had enough of an impact on him that when it came time to have a Punisher for himself, because he felt that he needed that, that was the image that he drew up. Which is why he sees two towards the end of the game after killing Eddie in self-defense. Before I stop talking about the video game in general, there are a few small things I can probably touch on still. For example, James's letter seems to play a very large role in this game. Not only is it the thing that draws him to the town, but it's also his save icon. Throughout the game, there are these red squares, and every time he encounters one, that's your save icon. When James sees his first one, he mentions that looking at it makes him feel like someone's groping inside of his skull, and it gives him a weird feeling. I've seen this explained a few different ways before. One, it could be sheets of paper from James's letter, or that they could be James's repressed memories on written form. It could go pretty much either way. by the very end of the game, the very last save icon, there's, I believe, 9 squared up. That could be the entirety of Mary's letter, the entire thing. It could also be the fact that he now remembers everything, so all of that information is there to bear. There is a phrase called a red letter, which usually is a letter that signifies an important occasion or like an anniversary or something of that sort, sometimes used in religious ceremonies for like a wedding or something special, which I guess you could consider Mary's letter to James calling him to Silent Hill to be that. But I don't think it's fully ever explained, so it's one of those things that you can interpret either way, especially by the time that all 9 pieces are out to bear for James. At that point, his letter has disappeared completely. Just like I mentioned earlier, throughout the game, as James learns more, his letter starts to slowly degrade. Eventually, words start to disappear, and then the letter itself disappears, and it's just the envelope. The same thing goes with Laura, too. She has her one letter that she stole from her nurse, Rachel, and then she has her second note that she got from Mary. And by the time she tells James about this letter, she can't find it. And that's never resolved. She never mentions it again. Most likely, it's just like James's, and it started to degrade and disappear as well. On the subject of James's amnesia, I don't fully believe that he came to town completely unknowing, like a lot of people theorize, because it's kind of made apparent that Angela and Eddie also went through a very similar process upon entering Silent Hill. Eddie isn't so much explicit in that, but the sight of seeing somebody dead in a refrigerator is enough to make him run into a bathroom and throw up. He's in denial. He says that he didn't do it, that it wasn't him, which at this point he probably didn't. But it's clear the town is at the very least showing it to him for a reason. For Angela, however, when you first meet her, she's still running around looking for her mother. Now, later in the game, the newspaper clipping that you read mentions that she did kill her father, but there was no mention of her brother or mother dying. So it's very possible that she could have gone after them afterwards, or not at all. And the next time you meet her in the apartment building, James makes the assumption that her mother lives in Silent Hill, and Angela asks him how he knows that. Now, according to the newspaper article we see towards the end of the game, her family is not from Silent Hill, but there's also no mention of any kind of family divorce or anything like that. So it's not fully clear if she's fabricating a story for James or just in general for herself. Obviously, there's supplementary material out there like the novelization, but that's technically not canonical since it wasn't written by the original writers of the games, so I don't refer to any of that for additional information. All we do know is that Angela's story is not making sense. And the next time we see Eddie is in the bowling alley, and he's opened up a little bit to Laura, and she knows that he's on the run, but he doesn't admit any wrongdoing, just telling her that he ran away because he was scared. I know this isn't a whole lot of information to run off of, which is why I just consider it to be my own personal headcanon. But my take on it is that when the town drew them in, it was almost like it was testing them in a way. And to do so, it starts out by putting them on a blank slate, which is very similar to the premise of the anime Death Parade. The basic premise of that anime is that once these characters die, they're sent to this purgatory, and their memories are completely wiped, and they're forced to be put through these games and trials. And depending on how they act throughout these determines if they get reincarnated or sent to the void. I don't know much about mythology, so I don't know if that anime is referencing anything, or if that's how the concept of purgatory in general works. But it is a nice idea I like to think of for Silent Hill 2. But again, it's my headcanon unless someone else can back it up with more evidence. Another random thing, I don't believe the fan theory that James has Mary in his car simply because there is no evidence to it. This is one of those morbid fan theories that has been around since the game originally came out. It was something people like to speculate on, saying that she was in a trunk, and another said that she was in the back seat. I think the only point of evidence I've ever seen anybody put towards this was because at the end of the In Water ending, James picks Mary up off of her bed, and assuming that he takes her soul back to the car to be with her body so he can take both of them into the water. Also because in that ending, he says that they can be together again. But to be together again, if she's already in the car, how is going into the water going to make them together again? They're already together, like they're physically. He means they would both be dead, as in together, as in like the afterlife or whatever, not like physically together again. And regardless of the ending, I still don't see James doing something like that to his wife, even though yes, he did kill her, and depending on the ending, he feels different ways about it, but he feels remorse for it either way in the end. And because of that remorse, I don't see him being able to make an entire car ride with her in the back seat, still dead. I mean, James is delusional by the time he hits Silent Hill, but I don't see him as being that delusional that he can't even look in the rearview mirror and see her. Not to mention, considering how he killed Mary and her current state, it's very possible that it could have been covered up as she just finally passed from the disease. James could have even gone through the entire funeral process. Now, in Silent Hill 4, Henry does mention that Frank Sunderland, who's James' father, said that James and Mary disappeared in Silent Hill a few years before. But considering Silent Hill 4 was the first game in the series to not be written, at least partially, by Hiroyuki Iwaku, Silent Hill 4 is the first game to kind of start making missteps and continuity errors in the lore. So it's hard to take every bit of information from that game as pure fact. For example, Frank could be fabricating his story. Maybe he knew James did what he did and told him to just go, and then just told everyone else that he hasn't seen him. Or maybe the town affected him in a similar way to James, and his memory's missing. So for me, I leave all this information kind of up in the air for speculation. The only other bit of evidence I've seen people bring forth for this theory is that in the Rebirth ending, James comes to Silent Hill to try to resurrect Mary. And when he's rowing the boat, there's a body in the boat with him. They're thinking that maybe he brought her body with him. That's a possibility. I will give some credence to that. But at the same time, he did just kill Maria. And her being a complete doppelganger of Mary, it's very possible that he could be using her body as well as the vessel to bring back Mary. So now that I'm done talking about all that, I guess I can finally start talking about my thoughts on how that's going to be in a movie directed by Christophe Gans. I don't believe Gans is a skilled enough director or writer to tell a story like Silent Hill 2. Silent Hill 2 is a very nuanced story, especially compared to Silent Hill 1. I mean, Silent Hill 1 had its symbolism, which a lot of people think it's symbolism for the sake of symbolism, without realizing that it's symbolism because the town's power is pulling from people's subconsciousness. In the case of Silent Hill 1, it was pulling from Alessa. But that symbolism wasn't part of the driving force of Silent Hill 1. It is, however, in Silent Hill 2. It's a part of its underlying mechanics. You could go as far as saying that the town's psychic energy is a character itself in this game. In Silent Hill 2, everything in the town was shifting and changing to adapt to James's subconsciousness. But in Gans's version of Silent Hill, there's no spiritual power like that. In the game, post Silent Hill 1, the town is drawing in these characters and then pulling from their subconscious and forcing them to confront their innermost traumas. This energy is neither good nor bad, it just is. And how people react to it or overcome it is entirely up to them. And that core concept is missing from Gans's version of Silent Hill. Because in his version of Silent Hill, it never had that spiritual power. It never had that transformative moment that you see at the end of Silent Hill 1. Christophe Gans has absolutely zero respect for Silent Hill 1, despite what he says. Otherwise, he would have used way more of it, rather than just a core concept of parent loses kid, the town has an otherworld. There's practically zero similarities beyond that. But, oh, it looks like Silent Hill. Yeah, so does Jacob's Ladder, Nightmare on Elm Street, The Mist, Session 9, Carrie, Twin Peaks, Shutter Island, The Cell. I can keep going. I can go on, but that doesn't make those movies Silent Hill 2. I mean, asking for it to just look like Silent Hill is setting the bar so low. Silent Hill Revelations looked like Silent Hill. Did we like that too? No, of course not. I'll never understand people who are content with mediocrity. But then again, these are the same people that probably play garbage like Homecoming and enjoy it because, hey, it looks like the movie. To even remotely make this new film work, Gans is going to have to rework the entire film's lore, considering he even remembers what it was, which we know he's not going to do. James Sunderland, if we're even going to still call him that, because we know Gans can't be bothered to remember a character's name in the first place, he'll travel to the same exact town from the 2006 movie, and it'll be just another monster movie. Characters like Angela and Eddie are going to be drastically changed, because their whole point of being in Silent Hill 2 is to reflect James's story, because they're affected by the town in the same way he is, showing the different ways that a town can react to people, adapting to their traumas, their pains, their sorrows. Eddie's ice, Angela's fire, and James's water. And without this aspect of the town, these characters need a whole new reason for being, if they're even still going to be in the story at all. They already said in the Silent Hill transmission from 22 that the story will be changed and modernized, that this film will be set in current times. And the storyboard showed James walking around with a cell phone, using it as a flashlight, and Gans goes on to say that it's going to be a real challenge for him to transcribe the language of video game to a story for film. And it's like, I got a great idea for you, Gans. There's a story in the game too. You could just translate that. Now he talks about the language of video games, and he's talking about the gameplay, which is exactly what he did in the first movie. He only took the gameplay and translated that to the story and added his own story on top of that. I mean, yeah, you go back and watch the movie. For the first half hour or so, Rose is following the same exact steps you do in the game. Goes down the alley, goes to the school. But locations aren't story. Video games have story. There's story in between the puzzles, in between the levels. Like, yes, I understand that the language of video game is different. In a film or a book, your story is consistent the whole way through. In a video game, you have your dungeons and your puzzles. So, for example, in Silent Hill 1, your, say, Midwich Elementary is your puzzle. And then your reward for finishing that puzzle is story. You get your clues, you get your cutscenes. It's usually how video games work. You can still translate that, you just cut out the puzzle and just focus on the story. There's a story there. I don't think he understands this. And Silent Hill 1's story is fairly simple. If he can't even translate that, how in the hell is he going to translate something so much more complex like Silent Hill 2? You know, but hey, as long as there's Pyramid Head and he's got those sexy abs, that's all that's going to matter, right? And to me, Christophe Gans made a horrible adaptation. You can still like the movie on its own, but as an adaptation of Silent Hill 1, it is a terrible fucking movie. And I have absolutely zero faith in him doing any better for Silent Hill 2. Konami hasn't given a shit about Silent Hill or its other properties in a very long time, if ever. I mean, there's still people that are pissed off about what they did to Kojima's Silent Hills, while I'm still pissed at what they did to Metal Gear Solid 5. That game was not finished. It's missing its last chapter, and they wouldn't even give Kojima the decency to finish it. They just said, nope, it's done, wrap it up now, and get out the door. That was Konami. Konami has been meddling with the Silent Hill franchise as far back as Silent Hill 3's development, mainly in the development of Silent Hill 4. It's debated that Silent Hill 4 wasn't even originally a Silent Hill game, but it can't be denied that Silent Hill 4 came out less than a year after Silent Hill 3, with a whole different development crew. And what they did with Silent Hill Homecoming and Downpour is exactly what they're doing again. Silent Hill Ascension should be proof of that alone. Konami is not a company like Nintendo or Games Workshop who have a stranglehold on their IPs to make sure that the integrity and the lore and the image of that property is maintained. Konami does not care, which is why they approved this new wave of bad ideas, especially Gans' movie. On the subject of the Silent Hill 2 remake, I'll save that topic for another video. I have my concerns, but it doesn't bother me anywhere near as bad as Gans ruining this franchise again. To me, not only is Gans not skilled enough to translate this story to film, but I don't think he cares enough either. Because if he cared about Silent Hill 1, he would have made Silent Hill 1. And if he truly cares about Silent Hill 2, like he says, and if he really wants to make it right by the fans, like he said, then he would do a full reboot and ignore his first film entirely, which he already said he isn't going to do. He said we're going back to his version of Silent Hill, which means this will be his version of Silent Hill 2. The town of Silent Hill is a character in the story of Silent Hill 2, and it's a main character that will be missing in his film because it never existed in the first one. Hell, to wrap up our characters' element themes, Eddie's world being ice, James's world being water, and Angela's world being on fire, maybe Laura's is wind, and she flows freely through the town, and the town itself is earth, holding everything together. How's that for a theory? Well, I guess with the model done, it also means that the rant's done too. So, thanks for listening in on me vent. I don't know why, I mean, I do know why I hate this movie so much. My biggest fear was how it was going to affect the creation of a Silent Hill 2 adaptation in the future, and it looks like that future is now finally coming, and I just know that it's not going to be anywhere near what we want, what I want. At the same time, I have like a very specific idea in mind when it comes to how this movie would be done if done properly. Very few directors could probably do it right. In my opinion, somebody like David Lynch probably could have done Silent Hill 1 very good. Even though I'm honestly not a huge fan of his directing style, he gets a little too weird in my opinion. And he seems to have this weird affinity for very bad special effects. I don't understand it. But each game pulls its references from different movies and books, and this includes its visual styles and storytelling. To me, I can't think of a better director for Silent Hill 2 than somebody like David Fincher. He's been able to pull off very similar stories. I'm thinking like Seven, Zodiac, The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, Criminal Minds was also really good. That crime drama is what he is insanely skilled at. But on top of that, his directing style, his visual style is top notch. And on top of that, I'm not a huge fan of Nine Inch Nails anymore. You can tell I like industrial music a lot, but he's kind of strayed away from that. But when it comes to his film scores, he's right back to where he was back then in the 90s. And when he works with David Fincher, that sound is perfect for that theme. David Fincher is also a very consistent director. He is constantly working on things, and he has collaborated with the same people over and over. I look at Christophe Gans as a very subpar director. Again, he's supposedly been directing for 40-some years, and he only made 4 movies in that time period. You can count one of his earliest movies, the Necronomicon, but he didn't technically direct the whole thing. He did a segment in it, so that's more or less like he just did a short film. Technically, I think it's credited as a short film because it was an anthology film and he did one story bit. But no, to me, Konami allowing Christophe Gans to make this movie is the equivalent of them handing their games to someone who is also subpar. We're talking Silent Hill Ascension, Silent Hill Homecoming, Silent Hill Downpour. You know, not the most qualified people to make these games, or in this case, this movie. But that's Konami, I guess. So I'll stop, otherwise I will not stop. And if you did like this, I have 2 more models that I have made and need something to talk about for those too, so I can do that. If you don't like this, I can always just talk through how I did the model, and then that's it. So we'll end this video with some shots of the memory of Alessa.